So I just want my Republican colleagues to hear me out for a second here. As a white dude, as a pretty privileged white dude, there's been a lot of talk on this amendment and others about how, of course, we're going to uphold the law. This is already coded into place. We're going to take care of it. But you all got to understand, I hear that we were founded on the premise of e pluribus unum. Equal protection was not written into our Constitution. That came with the 14th Amendment. We were founded as a country where most people in this country could not even vote. And we are now sitting here today in a world where this Supreme Court, with judges appointed by Donald Trump, are deeply hostile to the entirety of the 14th Amendment. They nullified Section 3 of the 14th Amendment so that Donald Trump could get on the ballot. This Supreme Court essentially gutted the ability to have affirmative action under the provisions of the 14th Amendment, arguing that it's okay for colleges to seek diversity in terms of regional distribution around the country, in terms of academic interests, in terms of a mix of jocks versus nerds, but God forbid they seek diversity on a racial basis. And now this new president has said that he wants to get rid of birthright citizenship, which is the plain text of the 14th Amendment. So what are we left with? We're left with the Equal Protection Clause in there if they succeed in all those things, and you're asking us to listen and say, well, we're going to honor that. We took an oath when we got this job just a few weeks ago to defend the Constitution, not just the parts we like, the whole thing. And so if we are going to have a good and constructive bipartisan term, it costs you all nothing to simply say that in this committee we are committed to equal protection regardless of what another person in a co-equal branch has to say. I don't know why you wouldn't. I hope that you will. Yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Part of our responsibility in the majority is to listen, but also part of our responsibility is to speak also, perhaps to not defend positions, but to add some level of content. I'm from Texas. We have people that walk across the border every day just to have children in this country. That is against the law. We have people that fly to territories of the United States, fly in just to have babies. To get an American passport, to get the American whatever is offered. I think what the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said is that in his executive order, he would like to challenge the Congress and government agencies to look at this issue, to be thoughtful about it, to gather together some, what I would call facts of the case, what I would call ideas about perhaps the misrepresentation, how people are taking advantage of this. I'm sick and tired of people coming to this country and killing our law enforcement officers, as happened to a Border Patrol agent just a day or two ago. I'm sick and tired of criminals finding loopholes in the benevolence that this country has. I'm sick and tired of seeing politicians and people who will allow our federal law enforcement and sheriffs that are isolated in places a long way from their necessarily work location, men and women who are out the beaten path trying to protect this great nation. And I think it's worthy to be able to say that a country should be able to decide what its policies are. Other countries choose not to allow anyone to become a citizen, not allow anybody to come and work in their cities in their countries. And yet others allow anybody to come, but they can never become a citizen no matter what. This country should make its own decision. But I think it's a little short-sighted simply to take advantage of what I think the president said in his directive, and that was, I think, the way I read it is, he wants us to look at the facts of the case and see what we think about it. He's challenging Congress. That's us, and that's you too. To take a look at the facts of the case and to see what would merit looking at the policy and seeing if we need to change it. This was done as a result of the Civil War. The gentleman is correct. But I don't think that it should mean that anybody that comes here under today's measures and conditions, just because they step across the border to have a baby, that should make them an American. So I think it's probably something that we need to occasionally stand up and just defend what the president said and also what we think is a good review. And I appreciate the gentleman taking his time to provide his feedback, because that is part of what this is about. And certainly Mrs. Beatty has done that, and the chairwoman from California, our former chairman, has done that same thing, and you've articulated carefully and thoughtfully what your ideas are. Our job is to listen also. But I think occasionally good reviews of policies where people take advantage of you is the right thing to do. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's what I intend to do. And I want to thank the gentleman for yielding time to me, and I'll yield back my time.
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, step right up and prepare to be amazed. This is an ordinary folder. As you can see, no hidden compartments, and yet inside, it's an invisible rabbit. If you like that trick, you are going to love Donald Trump's national energy emergency. It's also totally imaginary, but as any good carnival barker will tell you, there's a sucker born every minute who falls for the shtick. Let's review the numbers. Under the Biden administration, U.S. created 16 million jobs, had the fastest growing economy in the OECD, held oil demand flat, drastically cut coal use, embraced cleaner, cheaper renewables and efficiency. We decoupled economic growth from fossil fuel, giving American people more heat, more light, more power, more money. That put downward pressure on domestic oil and gas prices, which caused domestic fossil producers to export into less developed, more remunerative overseas markets. Now, before you say there's no emergency here, consider this from the perspective of our poor oil and gas producers. They're losing market share. They're making less money, but they got an ally in Donald Trump. After all, he's the guy who forced the Saudis to curtail production in 2020 to drive up oil prices and oil industry profits. That's right. He made sure U.S. consumers paid more for gasoline. Ta-da! Don't be a sucker, but if you are, I am available for parties and I can solve all your invisible rabbit problems. You can keep hopping, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Members are reminded.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you to our whole leadership team. You know, days like today make me so proud to be a Democrat. We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis, and we are doing the work. The amount of work that went through on very short order to deal with this emergency that's coming through is because people who care about their job, who take their patriotism seriously, their oath to the Constitution seriously, and that's what we're here to do. I wish we didn't have to do it, but my God, I'm proud to be on this team. We are here today because there is a narcissistic billionaire running the government who peddles in fascism, is known for his history of lying, short-paying his vendors, terminating employees who challenge his worldview, and using the judicial system as a cudgel against anyone who dares challenge him. And if you are listening to that and saying, is he talking about Donald Trump or Elon Musk, then you kind of get the problem, don't you? The actions that Musk and his IT goons have taken through, they're illegal, very clearly illegal, but so far unprosecuted actions, have already compromised millions of Americans' privacy and data security. And if you want to understand how nervous you should all be, think about how hard Donald Trump worked to protect his tax returns from becoming public, even under a legitimate subpoena from the House of Representatives. Why do we think that Elon Musk and Donald Trump would like to have access to your home address, your bank records, your history of charitable giving, alimony payments you may have made, child care payments you may be making, all of this private information that you would like? Why do we think they want that information? Why do we think that they want the ability to illegally stop payments that are legally due to hospitals that may be providing women's health care services they don't support, to veterans agencies that are helping our veterans, to Social Security recipients who maybe marched at a rally and said something they didn't like? Why are they doing that? Why did they allow a bunch of let's be honest, practically children, teenagers, young 20-somethings, why did they allow them to go into systems that control trillions of dollars of Treasury payments that every one of our adversaries would deeply like to hack into? Because if they could hack into there, they could destroy the U.S. economy. Why did they allow these children to go in there with unsecured software and hardware and tamper with those systems? Why did they do that at the same time that they were firing FBI agents, firing CIA agents? What is the consequence of that? If we close this barn door today, how much is already burned down? We don't know the answers to those questions. I wish we didn't have to ask. But those are the stakes of this moment. And there's an even larger question, as our leader alluded to. Why is the Department of Justice not enforcing the law and prosecuting these crimes right now? Why do we not have Republicans who all took the same oath we did a couple weeks ago to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Why are they standing there doing nothing? I know every one of us was elected to lead. None of us went out in the elections and said, if you elect me, I will promise to cower before the first bully who shows up. That's what we're here to do, to lead. This legislation is an important first step. We're not going to stand idly by, and this legislation will become law. All we need is 3 Republicans to show a little bit of patriotism to join us in this effort. I know they're out there. I know they've got the patriotism. They just got to show the courage. That's where we are right now. Thank you so much. I should mention that our office has received more phone calls on this topic than anything in my 6 years of Congress. And I say that only because if I leave here early, it is only because we called a telephone town hall that's starting in about 30 minutes, and I have to be talking to people because they are all deathly concerned about what this means for them for all the reasons that I articulated. Hopefully I'll be able to stick around for questions. In the meantime, turn it over to our wonderful and talented whip, Catherine Klein.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Can you attempt to answer your own question that you and Mr. Casten posed, which is, why is Elon Musk accessing all of this data through the federal agencies you mentioned, names, social security numbers, medical records, things like that? What is your worst fear here about why he is doing this?
It's a great question. I'm going to yield to our 2 sponsors.
Well, certainly we need that answer, but we know that we need the protection. This is uncharted, unprecedented ground. I'm telling you as a former Treasury person, I mean, I was there during an actual crisis, not a self-inflicted crisis. We need the answer to why he's doing it. We need our legislation. We need this Taxpayer Data Protection Act. This is unbelievable lawlessness. We've always had this trust between the House, the Senate, the presidency, and then in comes this executive order that seemingly has allowed this individual to go in to the Fiscal Bureau of the United States of America and say that he has your information while people are struggling to pay the bills. Let's be honest, as the leader just said. So, yes, all they need to do is we got to have 3 join us and get this bill passed. And by the way, my friends, the first Friday of this month is tomorrow. Jobs numbers are coming out. We didn't see a slip for the last 4 years.
I just want to just talk about what I'm truly afraid of, and I'm saying what's happening. And to give some context, I was talking with one of my Republican colleagues and friends not long ago, and I said, what would it take for you to stand up to Donald Trump? And the immediate answer without a moment's thought was, how did that work out for Adam Kinzinger? There is a deep fear of what a bully will do. Rule my dad taught me was, when the playground, never start a fight, but if the bully punches, you punch him back harder, because that keeps him from coming back. Bullies are cowards at core. So what am I afraid of? That they are going to use data that they are legally not allowed to use to act as a bully. So what does that mean for my home state of Illinois, where our Governor Pritzker has been very forceful in calling him out? If they take control of the stop payments, does Illinois all of a sudden not get their Medicaid reimbursement money? What does it do for, someone, we've already seen him take security details away from Liz Cheney, right? While releasing people who attack cops out into the public. If they're willing to do that and threaten that, well, what might they do to someone who's on a fixed income but had the strength of their convictions? What they know is that every time we have faced crises like these in our history, inevitably the movements that have toppled tyranny have been led by people who had gotten to a point where they had nothing left to lose. The Parkland students who survived, the Mamie Tills of the world, right? If they can find those people who have almost nothing left to lose and say, well, I'm going to cut off your Social Security payments if you step up. I'm going to cut off your veterans benefit payments. I'm going to cut off your SNAP payments. This is despotism, right? And I think a part of our message to everybody is that fear is contagious, but so is courage. And we want to make sure that people act with courage and the strength of their convictions, and hope that what we're showing now maybe spreads to a few folks across the aisle.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker, my colleagues, we are in a constitutional crisis. The President of the United States is trying to delete the 14th Amendment, ignoring Congress's constitutional power of the purse to illegally block federal spending, exposing the identities of our intelligence officers to our enemies, and sending Elon Musk's unvetted minions into our financial systems to steal Americans' private information. Now, in the normal course, these violations would be prosecuted by the Department of Justice. But their leadership has put personal politics over the rule of law. In the normal course, Congress would act as a check and balance, but Republican leadership in both chambers is most charitably described as missing in action. And we are only 19 days in. The White House is now dismantling USAID, pulling back on our soft power at the precise moment when China and Russia are trying to increase their influence over global affairs. Is this because of social media conspiracies, foreign influence operations, or just because Elon Musk is still angry that USAID helped to topple apartheid in South Africa? There are no good answers to that question. They're targeting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, stripping our ability to make weather forecasts in the wake of rising seas, surging hurricanes, and ever more devastating wildfires. Take away our ability to give advance notice of those storms, and Americans will die. They're opposing competitive markets as they refuse to enact existing laws to build out EV charging networks and renewable energy, because they know that to do so would be to bring resources onto our system that would further erode the market share of more expensive and dirtier energy. And they've now stolen data from the Treasury Department files so that Elon Musk, a man who gives Nazi salutes and actively campaigns for the neo-Nazi party in Germany, can access personal information that could potentially be used to target his political enemies. This is the very foundation of fascism, all of which leaves us in this chamber with a choice. As we sit here on the fulcrum of history, we can act to make these 19 days a footnote to an otherwise noble history of these United States, or we can go to our graves knowing that we did nothing during the 19 days that forever destroyed this 250-year-old experiment. We can choose evil in this moment. We can choose to ignore everything that Jesus preached on the Mount as we persecute the meek so we can enrich the merciless. We can choose cowardice. We can give $1 to a homeless man on the way into work so we can take away hundreds of millions of dollars from housing assistance once we get there, telling ourselves that to do anything else would be to cause our seat to be filled by a less compassionate soul. We can decide that if we aren't in leadership, then our job is just to follow orders. Sometimes that excuse works. It didn't at Nuremberg. But there's no difference between any of those choices. They all lead to the same outcome, and for this reason, I will be offering a fourth option, and at the appropriate time, I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered this motion with an important amendment to this bill to say that it shall not take effect until the illegal freeze of taxpayer dollars that Congress appropriated to the Department of the Interior, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and other agencies is stopped, and civil rights and employment protections for nonpartisan federal public servants are restored, and Doge and billionaires like Elon Musk no longer have unlawful access to federal government systems and the private, sensitive data of tax-paying Americans. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the text of this amendment.
Without objection.
That motion is a chance for all of my colleagues to choose leadership, to choose patriotism, to choose to honor the oath that we all took to the Constitution, to be remembered and honored by future generations, and to, in the words of William F. Buckley, to stand athwart history and yell, "Stop."
Yield the gentleman 30 seconds.
I yield back.
Reserve. 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance defines anti-Semitism in part as using symbols and images associated with anti-Semitism and denying the intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people by Nazi Germany. And here's Elon Musk, giving Nazi salutes, supporting the neo-Nazi party in Germany, and telling them that Germany has, quote, too much of a focus on past guilt. This weekend, Mr. Musk was given access to U.S. citizens' personal data and the disbursement of federal resources, allowing him to decide which Americans are able to access federal programs like SNAP, Social Security, and Medicaid. Let me be very clear. Putting anti-Semites in charge of the allocation of government resources and personnel does not end well for any of us. Fascism survives only so long as the evil at the top is supported by cowards down below who are willing to look the other way in some exchange for some proximity to power. So is the Republican Party going to stand up against anti-Semites and stand up for the American people? Or will they sit in silent, cowardly complicity with the evil of their leaders? The world's watching us, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Casten, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying here so late. There's been a lot of conversation about this, the serious end of crypto, stable coins. I'm going to focus on the silly end, the meme coins. It's funny, we have all these rules of decorum, and it is hard to talk about meme coins with the language that the industry uses to talk about them. I see you all smiling. We'll refer to them as fecal coins for the purpose of this hearing. Is it safe to say from your smiles that you generally share the view of the industry that this is not something that has any innate value, these meme coins?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Have any of you invested in, and again, this starts to get a little bit colorful language, the Hawk Tuah Girls coin? Have any of you invested in that? No? Okay.
They're fan clubs is really what they are.
Yeah, and I say that to raise a more serious point that, as several of my colleagues have noted, the President of the United States issued something that has no innate value. It doesn't have the value that maybe a Bible or a pair of sneakers or a steak or a bottle of water has. It has no innate value. It hit, I think, $75 at its peak the day before the inauguration on the 19th. Anybody know what it's trading at today?
It's a lot less, but I haven't checked. It was like
just under $16 when I was just checking here a moment ago. But like the Hawk Tuah Girl coin, it's really volatile. You know, you boost your Q score and it bounces up, and then people realize they're holding something worthless. The rise in value when it popped up, according to Chainalysis, so that it appeared to include a significant profit to Chinese traders, that 50th of the largest investors in the coin have made profits in excess of $10 million each, and the crash in the coin's price has caused more than 800,000 wallets to lose $2 billion combined. Now, as I understand the work that Chainalysis does, they don't capture any off-chain transactions. So, you know, stuff happening at Kraken or otherwise. So, Mr. Yakum, is it reasonable to assume that the $2 billion in on-chain transactions is much less than the total loss that's actually been experienced from meme coin investors?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. I can't speak to the specifics of on-chain versus off-chain. I know for our markets, again, we have
but I'm just making the point that, like, the Chainalysis reports, they're tracking on-chain trades, right? And so we know, I mean, there's been like National Bureau of Economic Research that said that for Bitcoin, maybe 10 times the volume is off-chain. So if we know it's 2 billion on-chain and there's all this off-chain volume, safe to assume that the total losses are more than 2 billion, right?
Potentially, Congressman. I think, you know, when it comes back to your question of the role, the value.
well-
I think value is in the eye of the beholder, and a lot of these are sentiment-driven assets.
yeah,
Right?
fine. Doesn't have any value. Now, I think there's a lot of conversation we can get into about what's the net worth, and obviously, like, the Trump family and the entities they control has gained a lot on this. But because we still have rules that commingle brokers and issuers and dealers, the reports are that, and again, according to Chainalysis, is that entities that the Trump family controls has made perhaps $100 million on trading fees for these coins, setting aside what the value of the coin is. And again, that's just based on the on-chain transactions that they track. Mr. Massad, you say you've got a comment there. I'm assuming that you would agree with me that the Trump family has probably made more than $100 million in broker's fees. We just can't track it.
We cannot track it, but Congressman, you're raising so many good points. And the thing about these are that, the industry talks about securities versus commodities distinctions. If I were at the CFTC today, and someone came, or 2014, someone came to me with the Dogecoin instead of Bitcoin, I wouldn't have declared that a commodity. Okay, it shouldn't be traded as a commodity. It shouldn't be regulated by the CFTC, maybe by the CFPB, but that's the kind of speculative stuff.
There's rich investor protection here, but I'm running out of time.
Yeah, we need it.
I want to get to another point. If you have something that's hard to track, that has no innate value, that doesn't require you to give something like a sneaker or a Bible in exchange for goods and services, isn't this just a way to transfer money to people? And if we know that foreign governments are participating in these markets, isn't this a violation of the emoluments clause of the Constitution? Now, I know we've had conversations about engaging in personalities. This is not partisan. This is a question of, do we in Congress think that the Constitution is worth defending? And if the President of the United States is putting out something that has no innate value and is getting foreign entities to pay him for it, isn't that a direct violation of the emoluments clause? And if we are taking our oath to defend the Constitution, shouldn't we care about that? Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Powell, always a pleasure to see you again. I want to start, and I don't expect you to comment on the policy here, but there's been a number of actions from the Trump administration of scrubbing or limiting data that the private sector has historically relied on to understand the direct and indirect impacts on the economy, public health data, information about breaking things down by gender, by race, that we need to understand granular shifts in the economy. I realize that you don't rely exclusively on government data, but has there been anything that has happened since the Trump White House was sworn in that has limited the Fed's access to information you need to fulfill your dual mandate?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
If there was, will you commit to sharing it with Congress so that we can fulfill our oversight responsibilities?
Sure.
Okay. When you were here in July, I'd asked you this question. I just want to confirm that you still feel the same way. Is it still your view that the Federal Reserve that climate change constitutes an emerging threat to U.S. financial stability?
I guess I would say it this way. I wouldn't say that climate change is currently a threat to U.S. financial stability.
An emerging threat.
I would say that it may emerge over time as such.
Okay, so $250 billion of losses in California. We've now got multiple states where the insurer of last resort is insolvent, reporting today that California is having to bail it out. I know we have a difference of opinion on NGFS. I don't want to go into that, but is the Fed monitoring what is happening to our financial system as those insurers pull out, as insurance rates goes up, and people's both access to property insurance and the cost of insurance are going up? Are you monitoring what's happening systemically in our economy as a result of that?
Yes. The question, though, if the question is it a threat to the financial stability of the United States? That's really the question. And of course, we're following that very, very carefully.
Okay, so if you're monitoring it, where is the risk that was being backed by the insurance industry moving? Where in the economy does that risk now live?
So insurance companies, as you know, can cancel policies and not issue them, and they can leave states, and they're doing a lot of that. So where do those risks fall? They fall on homeowners and other beneficiaries, and they fall on state governments and to some extent the federal government. But they don't fall on, they don't cause large financial institutions to fail.
Are you seeing shifts in mortgagers, mortgage servicers, their willingness to provide loans to homes as those insurance rates go up or disappear?
Implicitly, if you can't get insurance, then there won't be a mortgage. So okay. I can't point to episodes where that's happening, but that's certainly where this looks like it's headed.
Okay, because, I mean, there has been reports going back several years now that the more prone your property is to flood risk, to fire risk, the more likely you are as a bank to offload that onto Fannie and Freddie, right? We've seen that data happening. So that then raises the question of, and this is maybe just purely academic and wonky, if you own a set of cash flows and you want to sell them to me, and we both have full information, I'm only going to buy them from you at an accretive value to you to the extent that I have a lower cost of money than you do, right? Just, I mean, sort of like Econ 101, right? So if we own Fannie and Freddie right now because they're in receivership and they are throwing off a string of cash flows to the Treasury, setting aside the nuances of how the CBO scores all these sorts of things, isn't the sale of Fannie and Freddie on the assumption that the buyer and seller have perfect information, the same information on both sides of that transaction, if that's accretive to the American taxpayer, doesn't that implicitly assume that we have to sell to somebody with a lower cost of capital than we do?
That's I followed your logic there. Yeah.
Okay, and that would only not be true to the extent, I suppose, either that the buyer violates every rule I had in my M&A career of paying for upside, as they say, or that the buyer lacked information that the seller had, right?
Fair.
Okay. So what I'd like to understand from you is, does that create a conflict of interest for the United States government? Because if we have if we have information about climate change being scrubbed from our data sets, and we have a White House that would like to sell Fannie and Freddie, are we committed to efficient markets that depend on accurate, transparent information, or are we committed to making a quick buck, in which case we might want people not to be uninformed? Is the Fed committed to transparent markets, I guess, is the first question, and then the second one, do you feel that conflict?
I think we're getting a little away from our mandate at the Fed. I mean, the idea of privatization is to get this off the balance sheet of the Fed and get private capital backing it up. And
sure, and there would be good reasons for that, but if that is coming at the expense of value to the American taxpayer, we need to be transparent about that.
Right, but we have private sector banks. You know, we could make all credit could be made cheaper if offered by the central
Yield back.
government, right?
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you. I just note that Mr. Barr's support for giving unvetted personnel access to the Treasury payment system with unsecured devices, hacking in not only U.S. taxpayers' information, but other information held by the Treasury, is neither patriotic nor is supported by the full committee. I want to ask a really dumb question first, and this is not a gotcha question. Does anybody disagree with the statement that price increases are inflationary? I see. Okay. So we agree that the tariff policy that Donald Trump is imposing to raise prices on imported goods is inflationary. I am sure we may have differences, we certainly have differences up here about the fiscal consequences of that, but it raises questions about what happens when the fiscal policy of the United States is at odds with the monetary policy of the Fed. One is trying to bring down inflation, one is actively working to bring it up. The 1890s show an example of what happens. I would rather not make America great again back in that time period, even though a lot of the White House seems to support what life was like in the 1890s. But for us to manage that, we are going to have to keep an eye on the data in the system. Do all of you support, as Chairman Powell indicated when he was a few weeks ago, that we have to make sure that data at the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics stays pure, stays accurate, stays untouched by political appointees trying to change that data?
Well, I think the accuracy and the purity of that data are absolute, and the credibility of that data are absolutely essential. Yeah. Can I make a distinction between price increases?
Well, I want to just move on because I want to get to another point that is not as partisan, and I think more supported. But I appreciate you saying that, because when Donald Trump is saying that he wants to go in and put Schedule F employees, get rid of them, make this political, there's bad things that happen. I want to shift to a different issue. I've heard concerns from a number of people who I trust about the surging volumes of dollar-denominated deposits in non-U.S. banks. And specifically that, and I have a hard time getting data that's all, some of this, the data gets a little stale, but in 2021, global banks were holding over $15 trillion in dollar-denominated deposits. First quarter of 2023, It broke a streak of 3 consecutive contractions. It was an increase of $326 billion of US dollar deposits in foreign banks. And so I guess, Dr. Cohn, given your work on the Federal Reserve Board, is that consistent with what you're seeing, that we're seeing increased dollar deposits in non-US banks?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Have any of you seen this data or heard the concern before? Okay. The issue that's been raised to me by several folks is that there's a consistent bipartisan push at Treasury to have a strong dollar because it lowers our borrowing costs. That in turn makes the dollar very attractive for remittances. It makes the dollar very attractive, it makes our exports stronger. And if we have increased dollar deposits at U.S. banks, the FDIC doesn't regulate those banks. And so if there is a run on those dollars, there's a macroeconomic concern. And BIS recently noted that global banks are turning to increasingly flighty funding services to secure those. In the first half of 2023, dollar funding by money market funds to global banks went up by 53%, and most of that came in the form of repos. So I guess, Mr. Consul, I'll start with you. Are there any hidden risks sitting out there in the repo market? And should we be concerned about any broader contagion if there's a run on those dollars?
I don't know enough to comment. I apologize.
Anybody have any intel into that?
So I was a repo trader on the Federal Reserve. The repo loans are secured by Treasury collateral, so they are very safe. In the past, a lot of banks traded unsecured. There was credit risk then, but today it's a much more stable form of financing.
But I guess like the security of money market funds makes sense when we're looking at our own borders. And the concern I have is like, what happens if we have large volumes? I mean, maybe if any just want to answer academically, if you're not familiar with the immediate data, if you have large growing volumes of dollar deposits that are outside the FDIC system, and those are being backed by money market funds, should we be concerned about that? Like it seems like with all of the checks we have internal to our economy, we know how to regulate those because our banks are regulated in the US. What happens if you've got huge numbers of dollar deposits at the Bank of China?
Historically, what happens if we have dollar disturbances abroad is the Federal Reserve has foreign swap lines, FX swap lines, where they will lend to foreign central banks who in turn can support the dollar deposits in foreign jurisdictions.
But doesn't that then create an issue where like our foreign adversaries could potentially be creating a run that we would have to step in and backstop with taxpayer money?
That is possible depending on the jurisdiction. Not all jurisdictions have swap lines.
Yeah, I do think it's important for the authorities in the U.S. and globally to look for spots, examples of things that might become unstable because of runs. I don't know whether this is that you've actually spotted one or not. But
I'm getting the tap. I don't know if there is a run. It's just it's a concern, and if you learn more, I'd love to chat with you.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. Quick question first, Ms. Fonseca, Mr. Pomeroy. Would you both agree that banks, non-banks that engage in bank-like activities should abide by the same consumer protection rules that are required of banks? Just yes or no? Yeah?
Yes.
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 Yeah, okay. I thought you'd say that. I raised that because I want to respond to something that Mr. Barr said in his opening testimony. He said that we have entered a new era where businesses are not attacked by tweet. Well, of course they're not, because the owner of Twitter put a couple $100 million into President's election campaign and in exchange got himself a job in the White House where he is hoping to earn a return on that investment. If the president were to attack Twitter, or if the president's sycophantic enablers in the Republican Party were to attack him on Twitter, I mean, I don't know, that would require a level of patriotism, courage, and public-mindedness that they have never shown. Of course they're not, doesn't make it right, but of course they're not attacking by tweet. So let's talk instead about how Elon Musk plans to get a return on his $200 million. Because if we give a damn about consumer protection, if we give a damn about competition and functioning markets, we should be petrified by what Musk is doing. Mr. Frotman, you had mentioned briefly with Mr. Sherman that Elon Musk is talking about this new payment system, X Money, that is expected to launch later this year. I believe you had referred to his quote when he said he hopes, I'm going to misquote it, he said he hopes to have users conduct their entire financial world on X. The former CFP chief technologist said that he has been given God-tier access to the CFPB system. I guess my first question for you, Mr. Frotman, is have you ever seen a CEO of a bank, a non-bank, or anybody being given God-tier access to the CFP data system before?
Absolutely not.
And can you describe exactly what that means and what data Musk is now getting that nobody else in the private sector has access to?
Sure. So this is tremendously concerning, I think, for consumers and competition, is that here is a person who has billions of dollars on the line when it comes to the dream of turning Twitter not only into a payments company, but into a super app like we see happening in China and other places. And you have the person who stands to benefit from this seemingly in charge and making decisions over what is basically their only federal regulator. And I think there are significant questions if we want to talk about oversight by this committee, if we want to talk about investigations by the Inspector General about what happened when Doge employees were in the CFPB on February 7th, and then that same day, Elon Musk is tweeting CFPB RIP.
So can you just clarify, though, because he's getting information that Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, they don't have that information about specific consumers, right?
Well, I think he's not only getting information about consumers, he's getting information about his competitors. Part of the job of the CFPB, as tasked by Congress, is to make sure we understand markets and where there's risk. And there's a ton of risk when it comes to non-bank payments.
Well, I want to say something very partisan. I think the richest man in the world is rich enough, but apparently that's not a widely held opinion. Justice Brandeis, famously back in the 30s, said that when you have great concentrations of wealth in society, you only have three options. You can either allow the wealth to take over the government, which is to embrace fascism. You can allow the government to take over the wealth, which is to embrace communism, or you can break up the wealth and embrace competition. What is clear, and the fact that it is so partisan to attack the fact that the richest man in the world is now taking over our system, is that it is partisan to attack fascism. To say anything else in this committee at this hearing, in this moment, is naive. Now, we are shortly going to move to marking up stablecoin legislation. It is my understanding that Mr. Musk is saying he would also like to use a stablecoin rule some stablecoin legislation in order to facilitate what he's doing in the CFPB, which would, unless we put really strict guardrails, is going to make it even harder. So I guess with the last 40 seconds, Mr. Frotman, let's assume that he has all that data. Let's assume that he has a very permissive stablecoin environment. It sounds to me like we have a non-bank that is going to compete the hell out of all of the banks and all the systems that we have right now in a way that is deeply anti-competitive. Please tell me I'm wrong.
You are 100% correct.
We going to defend capitalism around here? We going to defend competition? Or we're going to put on a ball gag, climb down in the dungeon, and just do whatever Trump tells us to do? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman yields back. Gentleman who's the vice-ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Casten, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Bessent, I'm starting my 7th year in Congress, and in those 7 years, I have never received more phone calls from my constituents on any issue than the hack into the Treasury payment system earlier this year. As you know well, this is the system that manages over $5 trillion a year of federal payments to taxpayers, payers to Social Security beneficiaries, payers to embedded foreign assets who are overseas and undercover, and it has their personal information and their routing information. This is a purple district. People were nervous. We sent a letter to your office along with 150 colleagues asking 20 questions. Your response that we just received was non-responsive on all 20. Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to enter those 2 letters into the record.
Without objection.
I want to get through a lot of those questions right now, Secretary Bessent, and I would ask you to be as brief as you were in your response, but I would very much like a more fulsome answer in writing. In January, the New York Times reported that you pressured David Lebrick out of his role overseeing that after he refused to grant that access to people that Elon Musk had imposed. Can you confirm the accuracy of those reports?
That's incorrect, Mr.
You met with him on January 30th, put him on administrative leave, and he left the day later. Is that accurate?
I did not put him on administrative leave. Administrative leave, I asked him to I met with him 90 minutes
So you're denying the New York Times report? Was it your choice?
I am adamantly saying that the New York Times is inaccurate.
Okay, all right, fine. That's yes or no. New York Times is inaccurate, fine.
He was not placed in administrative leave, and he subsequently resigned after sending numerous emails.
Sir, I'm just asking for yes or no questions. If you want to be voluminous, please write me a letter. Was it your decision to terminate Mr. Lebrick, or were you pressured by others?
He resigned.
Who made the decision to put him on administrative leave? You or someone else?
Again, sir, he was not put on administrative leave. That is
Okay, so you're denying the New York Times. Fair enough. Tom Krause, you a fan of him, who's now playing that role?
Yes.
Okay. You'd mentioned earlier he was in that role. Do you agree that that role includes duties that include managing Treasury's payment system to ensure timely Social Security payments, overseeing auctions for U.S. Treasury bonds, which determine interest rates, and ensuring the U.S. doesn't breach the debt limit? Would you agree that that's all part of the functions of that job that Mr. Rouse is now holding?
No.
No? Shocking? Okay. Does Mr. Krause have any prior experience in government service?
He does not, neither do I.
Does Mr. Krause have any prior experience in the financial sector, which of course you do?
What's that?
Just, you can answer me. You don't need to, I'm doing this solo. You don't need the people behind you to help you. Does Mr. Krause have any prior experience in the financial sector?
He had, in the financial sector, yes. He's put together more than 100.
No. Did he work for a bank? Did he work for a hedge fund? Did he work for a private equity firm?
He worked for a private equity firm.
He's the CEO of a software company.
He's done more than $100 billion of tech deals.
He runs a software company. He's still the CEO of that software company, isn't he?
I'm not sure.
He is. Is it your view that that job that he's holding is a part-time job?
I'm not
managing $5 trillion a year of distributions. That's a part-time job, or does that require full-time?
No, sir. He is not managing $5 trillion a year of distribution. He is doing a tech upgrade, an ERP system.
That's all that Mr. Lebrick was doing, was a tech upgrade?
Sorry?
Mr. Lebrick, who said, I'm not going to allow people to hack into this system. He was just doing a tech upgrade? Or you've downgraded what that job function is?
Mr. Lebrick was in charge of 1.5 billion payments a year, which 1/3 did not have a task identification.
Sir, come on.
So he had failed.
Come on, we're going to move along. The chairman, notably a moment ago, did not swear you in, so you are not under oath right now. February 4th, in your response to a Senate Democrats letter, you said that Mr. Krause will only have read-only access. A moment ago, in response to our chair, you said, and I quote, they were only granted read-only access at Treasury. You're not under oath right now. You could be, but you're not. Mr. Gioeli testified under oath in a recent hearing, saying that Mario Alez was given right access to the Treasury payment system. Do you wish to correct your remarks to the chair, the ranking member?
I would say that
no one was given right access.
I never granted anything other than
But Mario Alez was granted right access.
I never granted anything other than read-only access.
Mr. Alez left the Treasury Department in part after it was discovered that he said normalize Indian hate and I just want a eugenic immigration policy. Do you agree with those sentiments?
I do not at all.
Do you think that someone who has those sentiments should be employed in your department?
That I had a conversation with the vice president that I admired his grace.
He then went to HHS.
The gentleman's time has expired. Thank the gentleman from Illinois. The gentleman from Indiana is now recognized, Mr. Stutzman, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this week we will vote on bills to defund the police, sow the seeds for our next financial crisis, and remove any remaining fig leaf that we might hide behind when we insist that Congress is a co-equal branch of government. I'm, of course, referring to the highly misnamed Genius and Clarity Acts. Let's dive in. The way a tool is used, that's the purpose of the tool. If you watch a carpenter use a screwdriver, you can ignore someone who says that's a tool for hammering nails. Crypto's been around since 2009. Watch how people use crypto over the last 16 years, and you can ignore anyone who says this is a tool for legitimate finance, because the tool is overwhelmingly used for crime. The Russians use crypto to evade sanctions and fund their war in Ukraine. The North Koreans use it to fund their nuclear program. Hamas used it to fund their October 7th attack. Fentanyl traffickers use it to get paid. All 100% of ransomware attacks in the United States get paid in crypto. That's a really good argument for legislation. And if the crypto industry did not want to hang out with criminals, They would have welcomed good legislation, but these bills are not that. The Clarity Act would exempt any platform that is the network for crypto transfers from any regulation at all. Now, that might be attractive to my Republican colleagues because Donald Trump's World Liberty Financial is one of those platforms. The Clarity Act would defund white-collar police by shifting most of these coins from the well-staffed, well-funded Securities and Exchange Commission to the much smaller CFTC. It would exempt whole classes of crypto, so-called meme coins, from any regulatory supervision. You know that Trump coin? That's a meme coin. It would allow normal, healthy public companies to evade all SEC regulation by tokenizing their stock so they can raise more money from less informed, less sophisticated, dumber investors. And finally, it would allow anyone to create a self-hosted wallet, basically like an online account, where you can transfer assets between anonymous users with absolutely no regulatory supervision. If your goal is to make money laundering easier, I have no idea how to make the Clarity Act better. And yet somehow the Genius Act manages to be even worse because it connects the fraud of crypto to the real financial system. The Genius Act is for so-called stable coins. I say so-called because they are neither stable nor are they coins. They are bits of computer code that you can buy and sell at any time, in theory, for $1 real US dollar. Now, as of May, there were 247 billion with a B dollars of stablecoins in circulation. How's the tool used? 6% of them are used to buy things. Nearly 90% are used to provide a liquidity bridge between much shadier cryptocurrencies, you know, the ones contemplated by the Clarity Act. Now, to state the obvious, no one will sell you a gallon of milk for a Trump coin, but they will take dollars. So criminals need stable coins so they can make crypto crime pay. And the blockchain, of course, doesn't fix this because smart criminals cover their tracks. And they've created these digital mixers that commingle lots of crypto together and spit out a clean, or shall we say, laundered blockchain. This is why the Treasury Department has described particularly offshore mixers as, quote, a primary money laundering concern. The United States Treasury Department. Now, of course, you can't make a profit buying and selling something at the same price, so the stablecoin issuers, like banks, want to earn interest on the dollars they hold, except that those issuers are not regulated like banks. And we saw this when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed a couple of years ago, and the price of the USDC stablecoin, which was supposedly worth $1, fell to 88 cents as the run on the bank exposed the company's failure to put their deposits in insured accounts. USDC only looks stable today because all you taxpayers bailed them out with the FDIC. The Genius Act makes this problem even worse by saying that in the event of a future bank run, those uninsured crypto deposits, the irresponsible depositors, they get a claim on money before your deposits, you as a good depositor. That puts every American's deposits at risk. Amendments were introduced to fix every one of those problems, and every one of them was rejected, which brings me to a final point. You know who really benefits from crypto? Corrupt politicians. Last week, the United Arab Emirates sent $2 billion to convicted money launderer Changpeng Zhao using coins issued by Donald Trump's family. It's $2 billion in their bank account. The Trump family will earn about $30 million off this transaction, and Mr. Zhao is now asking for a pardon. These bills will make all of those crimes easier, and if we build it, crime will come. So when the crime happens, when the president gets richer, when your bank fails, when your deposits are wiped out, when the crypto bubble pops, just don't say you weren't warned.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I was to describe Jeffrey Epstein as a nice family man who works in finance, you might question why I was saying that. Well, if someone says that something that is neither a coin nor stable is a stable coin, you might question why they're saying that, because they aren't stable. Terra, which was a stable coin, collapsed to 30 cents and wiped out $40 billion in investor value. That was an algorithmic stable coin. More recently, as the ranking member has noted, USDC, a so-called stable coin, fell to 88 cents and only exists today because taxpayers bailed them out. These are some of the reasons why central bankers last week issued a warning that stablecoins threaten global financial stability and need a much more restrictive regime than traditional finance. The Genius Act ignores all those experts and instead ties stablecoins into our financial system, but without the safeguards that are required by banks and investment companies. As the ranking member noted, this allows big tech companies to issue stablecoins, amass consumer data, at the same time we're gutting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that protects consumers. It allows issuers to cherry pick the lightest touch regulator between the federal government and any of the 50 states. Rather than fixing the problems created when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, it makes them worse by saying that you can have uninsured deposits, but if there is a run on a future Silicon Valley Bank, the stablecoin issuers have a superior claim over every single person in this room who has a legitimate deposit in that bank. My colleagues have said this has a one-to-one requirement, except that that's not audited. There's only an audit requirement for companies over $50 billion in asset, which is only 2 stablecoins. So Donald Trump's stablecoin just has to say, I attest that there was value in here on the 30th day of the month, and you don't have an auditor. That ain't one-to-one certification. Finally, the Genius Act is a missed opportunity to limit foreign influence. We know that recently a convicted money launderer wrote the code so that the United Arab Emirates could buy $2 billion of Trump's stablecoin, which allowed President Trump to earn $30 million on the transaction. Now this convicted felon...
Gentleman's time's expired.
To the gentleman, additional
And I should clarify here, the convicted felon I'm referring to is the guy for insider trading.
Time's expired.
An additional 15 seconds to the gentleman.
The convicted felon I'm referring to is the guy who ran Binance, not the president, but he's seeking a presidential pardon. So the Genius Act sets the stage for an exponential crisis and allows the president to continue cheapening the office for his own financial gain, and I urge a strong no.
You're reminded.
For 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing you need to know about the Clarity Act is that it is designed to destroy U.S. capital markets. U.S. capital markets are the envy of the world because investors like putting their money in them. They are the envy of the world because we provide robust investor protections when people put their money in them, in part through the Securities and Exchange Commission. And yet the Clarity Act would allow companies to raise up to $200 million without any disclosure, without any transparency, just by tokenizing their security. But let's be clear, putting a security on the blockchain doesn't make investors safe. It might make money for the crypto industry. I know you all like that. It might make it possible for the companies to temporarily raise more money from dumb investors because they don't get that protection. But if we stop protecting investors, why would investors put their money in the stock market? They will abandon the U.S. to go to places with a better risk reward. I understand we got a lot of fraud and grift in the White House. I understand you are a big fan of fraud and grift in the White House, but we don't need any more. Let's protect Americans' hard-earned savings. Let's protect markets and not just make crypto bros richer. I urge a resounding hell no, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Chairman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Casten, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I must say, I hope my friend from Arkansas isn't suggesting that the lesson of the last century, when the U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency and compared to the rest of the world's currencies has been a remarkable store of value, is that we should return to the gold standard in the fiscal policies of the 19th century. I don't think that's what you meant, but that was weird. I want to just echo what Mr. Vargas just said, and I don't want to dwell too much on this, but do we all agree that the Fed's inflation target is 2%? Yes? Do we all agree that inflation is right now above 2%? Yes? Do we all agree that inflation right now is rising? Yes. Do we all agree that unemployment right now is rising? Yes. So there's really no argument to cut rates, as the Fed just did, but for rising unemployment. We're going to have a dual. This just seems like a weird day to be talking about separating that from unemployment. Anyway, we've had another weird thing that happened today, which is that Stephen Moran was confirmed to the Fed. And in a paper he wrote last year, he said that he wanted to ban the, quote, revolving door between the executive branch and the Fed. Now, he's decided that he's not going to leave his role in the executive branch, which I guess means there's no revolving door. He's just taking the door off the hinges and it's a wide open door. Mr. Amaranth, does having somebody who simultaneously works in the White House and at the Fed increase or decrease the independence of the Fed?
think it's hard to say decrease, so I have to say increase.
That wasn't meant to be a trick question. I'd say either. If you ran a hedge fund, would you like interest rates to be high or low?
It depends on how the hedge fund is exactly betting on things, but
Let's just say you had a long career running a hedge fund that really you made a lot of money thanks to a ZIRP policy of essentially zero interest rate policy from the government, and you could lever up your assets and call it alpha.
I mean, I think if you have lower interest rates, you have more scope for leverage.
Okay. If you had a lot of real estate investments, would you like interest rates to be high or low?
I think typically speaking, people on the real estate side pay more attention, are more interest rate sensitive, and probably can do more activity in the seller.
Because it seems to me we've got a president who's made a lot of money in real estate and a secretary of the treasurer who's made a lot of money as a hedge fund operator. And I'm wondering if you are simultaneously working in that White House and at the Fed, whose interest do you think you're serving?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big issues on this specific point is there's just an incentive structure where if he can return to his previous office, and that itself is kind of a function of the president's preference to bring him back. Kind of, if he wants to get his old job back, there would be incentive to align with the president pretty strongly.
Okay, and how about if you fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who's founded on a mission to fearlessly publish facts without regard to the influence those facts may have, and you replace that with someone who was storming the Capitol on January 6th, do you think that helps BLS integrity and making sure that people can trust the data?
It does not help.
Dr. Holtz-Eakin, I want to thank you for your service at the CBO. All of us appreciate what the CBO has done. Would you agree that accurate and impartial budgetary analyses help us do our job better here in Congress?
Yes, I do.
Do you think that partisan attacks on the CBO help or hinder our ability to make for evidence-based policy making?
I think the good news is that for a long, long time, the CBO has ignored all partisan attacks on its work, and it does its work as well as it can.
Okay, so when Trump refers to the CBO as, quote, Democrat-controlled, and Speaker Johnson says that the CBO's estimates are always off, does that help or hurt the ability of the CBO to do its job?
It does neither. CBO does its job. People say things about it all the time, I assure you.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So when the CBO director just recently said that Trump's tariffs have pushed inflation higher, do you think those comments were politically motivated, or he was just trying to express things to the best of his knowledge?
I think it's the latter. He's done the analysis.
And if you raise interest rates, does that cause tariffs to go down?
Sorry again, I missed.
If you raise interest rates, does that cause tariffs to go down?
No.
Because there was another CBO report that said that Trump's tariff and immigration policies are cooling the economy and contributing to inflation.
You can simultaneously have slower growth and higher inflation, and that's what they found.
Well, I would like us to be in a point where we don't have fiscal policy fighting with monetary policy. I would like us to be at a point where we don't have to worry about BLS data as presented by someone who stormed the Capitol. I would like us to be at a point where we are not saying that just because we don't like the data, we're going to chew people out. I would like us to be at a point where we're not saying let's lower interest rates to help out people who have not divested themselves of their assets before getting into public service. And I would like all those things to be nonpartisan someday. I yield back.
Let me recognize Representative Sean Casten from Illinois.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal. Mr. Ryder, you closed your opening remarks referencing the Epstein files. I want to share a story. I was talking with a teacher in Berwyn, and she said one of the parents of one of the students in her class said, I am less concerned about whether a masked, unidentified ICE officer seizes my child than I am with whether a child trafficker dressed as a masked, ununiformed ICE officer seizes my child. And I want us all to understand that Donald Trump is not the only child predator who is being protected by Mike Johnson, who is being protected by Kristi Noem, who is being protected by every one of our Republican colleagues who refuses to do their goddamn job right now. And we got to call that out in the same way Jasmine Crockett just did. I can get real emotional here, but I'm going to try to stay within the bounds of the law, at least for a little while. Mr. Fee, Fifth Amendment says that every American, not every American, everybody within our borders has a right to due process. 14th Amendment says that everybody has afforded equal protection under the law. The Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, no unlawful search and seizure. You can't be detained, cruel and unusual punishment. At what point in ICE's current process are they affording detainees with those rights?
It's difficult to identify any point in the process where they're following any of their detainees' rights consistently.
So is there a timing? When do they provide somebody with information? What's the legal basis for your detention? When do they provide people with notification of your due process rights? Ever?
In the instances that I've been involved with, it has not happened.
And is there any, I mean, we all watch cop shows, right? We all know the Miranda warning. Is there any exemption that ICE is not obligated to provide people with their constitutional protections that other law enforcement agents have?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so let me shift now to Broadview. ICE right now has this online detainee locator system, which is not mandated by law, right? They're providing this that you can look and see if somebody is being detained. That database does not provide any information about anybody in these quote-unquote temporary holding facilities, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so nobody knows. People get picked up off the street, they get swept up, they get disappeared. They don't know what their rights are, and we don't know where they are. Is that legal under any reasonable reading of the Constitution?
Absolutely not. And these folks are denied access to counsel as a matter of policy, and they're constitutionally entitled to that, and they do not receive it.
Okay. Several of our witnesses, I think Pastor Black had mentioned this, I think I'm forgetting, but several of you had mentioned that if you're breaking the law, there are consequences that can be held. I know people had mentioned our governor should maybe step up, maybe our attorney general. My understanding is that a lot of the enforcement of law is typically done by district attorneys, state's attorneys. Can you give any sense of the process for state's attorneys and district attorneys who are watching today? What process would they need to go through to prosecute ICE officers who, as law enforcement officers, are expressly violating people's constitutional protections? And whether you want to talk about breaking and entering, whether you want to talk about unlawful search and seizure, whether you want to talk about murder, I mean, all of these things seem to be happening. What is the process? Do states' attorneys have the ability to use that right now? District attorneys, what would they have to do in order to begin bringing penalties against these individuals?
I'd have to defer to my colleagues in the state government, but certainly folks have the right to get civil remedies against violations of the Constitution by federal law enforcement, and people are moving in that direction and are seeking that redress in courts.
Okay, well, I hope we can give some thought about that. California several years ago did bring charges against an ICE officer. Now, he was off duty when they did it, but there is a precedent for state officials doing that. And, you know, those of us who are out here who are angry, we're responsible for writing the laws. We don't have law enforcement authority, and I think our law enforcement partners can help. Pastor Black, I'd like to give you the final word, and I see I'm running out of time here. Speaker Johnson famously said, if you want to know what I believe, just read the Bible. You want to preach for us of any particular passages from the Bible that he might want to be reminded of as he thinks about whether or not he should do his job?
Thank you, Mr. Casten. This is the same speaker who said that it is not a problem in his view that an American pastor, a Protestant pastor of a mainline denomination, was shot in the head by ICE officers. I am reminded that the God of my religion is one who became incarnate to be among us and to suffer the way that we suffer. And I believe that Jesus is alive and active in all that we are experiencing right now, and that he is with those who are being detained, that he is suffering as they suffer. When I think, Mr. Casten, that you describe it very well when you describe this Operation Midway Blitz as a human trafficking operation, which is being federally sanctioned. We need help. When the federal government is attacking American citizens, who will protect us? The front line should not just be the brave mothers, Latina mothers, who are stepping up to organize our communities. We need every arm of our government to bring all their powers to bear to protect us, for those whose salaries we pay with our tax dollars, to protect us in real time every day.
Thank you. I yield back.